So in this video, I want to do an overview of the 13 different structures that Estill has identified that singers can independently control. And these different structures, they determine the vocal quality that we produce. So I want to kind of give you a little anatomy lesson, okay? So the base of all of this is our torso. And we have two options. We can have a relaxed torso, or we can have an anchored torso. And when your torso is anchored, your rib cage spreads and your sternum lifts. And for more difficult vocal things that you need to do, having an anchor, a higher effort number of a torso anchor, will help you achieve those things. Okay, so that's kind of the base, the platform. And then where all of the sound is produced takes place in your larynx, okay? So within the larynx, there are a number of different structures. At the base, you have the cricoid cartilage, and that kind of hinges in the back with the thyroid cartilage. And the thyroid cartilage goes all around here, okay? So it's this cartilage going across the front and coming around to the sides. And within the thyroid cartilage, we have the place where sound is produced. And these are the vocal folds. And they're running from the front here in a kind of diagonal straight line back. And they are at the base of the larynx, or the base of our house for vocal production. And so when the sound comes out from the lungs and up, they make the vocal folds vibrate, and this is where sound is produced. Above the true vocal folds, we have the false vocal folds. And these are, the true vocal folds, they kind of come out from the sides of your trachea. And the false vocal folds do as well. They're just above the true vocal folds. And the false vocal folds are actually fatty tissue. So while the true vocal folds are muscles, the false vocal folds are fatty tissue. And the muscles that control them are in the sides of our neck. So, but the false vocal folds, they interact with the true vocal folds. So if the false folds are constricted, that can interfere with the function of our true vocal folds and how they're able to vibrate. Above the false vocal folds, we have the aryepiglottic sphincter. And that is a muscle that can be wide or it can close a bit. And above that, we have the glottis, which is not something we use in singing. It's just for you to know that the glottis is what closes when you swallow, because that's what keeps the food from going down our trachea into our lungs. So the aryepiglottic sphincter is right there, and the glottis is connected to it. When we hold our breath, the glottis, everything closes. The true vocal folds, the false vocal folds, and aryepiglottic sphincter, glottis. When we swallow, the same thing happens. When we go into fight or flight, when we get really scared, when we get really nervous, we got to sing in front of a lot of people, that's fight or flight, and those muscles tend to close, just like fight or flight. So one of the things that's one thing to be aware of, that's partly, I think, why a lot of voice teachers say relax, because the emotional side of things can cause us to tighten, and we can't sing when the false vocal folds, when the epiglottic sphincter, when the true vocal folds are closed. It's not going to happen. So again, we have the torso, and then we have the larynx, and at the base of the larynx is the cricoid cartilage, and then the thyroid cartilage is larger and going in front, and it connects to the cricoid. And the the thyroid cartilage is kind of protecting our true vocal folds, and then above them are false vocal folds, and then above them the aryepiglottic sphincter. And then we have our jaw, so we can control our jaw if we want it to be forward or back. And then the tongue. So with our tongue, most of our vowels and consonants are produced at the tip of our tongue and the blade. And the back of our tongue, because the back of our tongue is actually at the top of our throat, it does affect vocal quality very much. So with Estill training, you can learn to control the back of your tongue, the dorsum, separate from the front of your tongue. And then we also have the lips. So we can learn, we'll talk about ways that the lips affect our vocal quality. And then also the velum. So the velum is also called the soft palate, and it is the door to the nose. So when we say ng or g or the velum comes down, it's in the low position, and all of the air is going out of our nose. So if we say the sound stops when I plug my nose because that's where all the air was coming. Say give it a try. Okay, so the velum is low and all of the air is coming out of your nose. If you say E, then your velum will go up in the high position. E, and all of the sound will be coming out of your mouth. So the door to the nose is closed. So E, notice how the sound didn't change. To go from low velum to high velum, we can go hung, hungy, hungy. And then the other option for the velum is mid-velum. And when you have a mid-velum, the air is coming out both your mouth and your nose. And this will have the effect of actually dampening the sound because of all of the space in your nose, all of these different cavities. The air has to wind around to come out, and the air is split, so it loses power. So you can practice getting to that mid-velum space by going the hung and going to E, but trying to stop right in the middle. So hung, hung, and you should be able to hear a slight difference in the sound when you're mid-velum, because some of that air is getting caught in your nose and not being able to come out. And then the last structure we have is the head and neck anchor. So we have muscles here, muscles at the top of our spine connecting to the base of our skull, and then we have muscles at the top of the throat, at the back of the nose, that work with our soft palate. All of these muscles, when they are anchored, when we're activating them, they will create a stable structure for all of the little muscles and structures in our larynx to move more freely and to fine-tune and adjust without doing as much work. So you can have a relaxed head and neck, or you can be anchored. And I also did a torso anchor at the same time. So let's review again. We have the torso, and then I didn't actually talk about the larynx as a whole. So the larynx as a whole can move up and down. And the major thing that this contributes to is pitch. So when we are singing up high, our larynx will be higher. And when we're singing down low, our larynx will be lower. And the reason for this is that, like a bass versus a violin, A bass has longer strings, a bigger wooden body, and that produces lower tones. Shorter strings, smaller spaces produce higher tones. So with the larynx, if our larynx is low, and it makes the space in our throat bigger, and it also, and so because of that, we are able to have a lower tone. When our larynx goes up, it makes the space smaller. So if you're trying to reach those high notes, one thing that will help is allowing your larynx to go up. Now, so in the larynx, remember, we have the cricoid cartilage, and we have the thyroid cartilage. And I didn't talk about the options for these, but the two options are vertical and tilt. Okay, so with the cricoid cartilage, during my normal speech, I'm not tilting my thyroid cartilage. When you yell, you generally tilt it. So you say, "Hey, guys!" Oftentimes your head goes back, "Hey!" And that is the effect of tilting your thyroid cartilage. So when you hear people belting, generally they are going to have a tilted cricoid. The thyroid cartilage, you can feel right here when it tilts. So in my normal speech, I'm not tilting my thyroid. But if you do a sob sound, ho, 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 or meow, ho, 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 you will feel the thyroid cartilage tilt right here, and it'll kind of bulge. You'll feel it kind of bulge, come down. So that affects vocal quality. It adds a different, like a sweetness to it. It'll also smooth out ornamentation and vibrato as well. Okay, so reviewing, we have the larynx at the base, the cricoid cartilage, and then the thyroid cartilage. And remember, inside, behind the thyroid cartilage, we have the true vocal folds, and they're connected up front and then to the back. And those are muscles, and I didn't talk about the different options for those, but they are thick, and when the true vocal folds are thick, they are closed for more of the cycle. So the pitch A, 440 hertz, the true vocal folds are vibrating 440 times a second. When the vocal folds are thick, because of having more surface area when they come together, they are closed for longer of each of those cycles. And because of that, the air builds up in this space below the true vocal folds. And when they open and the air is released, there is a greater difference in air pressure. And that is what creates a bigger sound. So this is thick, and this is, this is thick, and I'm going to take it a little higher, this is thin, and you can hear how it's not quite as loud sounding, and that is because the true vocal folds are not as thick, and so when they're vibrating, coming together, they're not closed for as long during each cycle. The other option is stiff vocal folds, and when the folds are stiff, because they are stiff, they're so thin, they're just barely touching, or sometimes not at all. And because of this, air is escaping very fast. And so it sounds breathier. So thick. Oops, that was thin. So and each of these different choices for true vocal fold body cover is appropriate in different types of music. The last option we have for true vocal fold body cover is slack. And in this case, the true vocal folds, they're not vibrating in a regular pattern, or it's just very sporadic, okay? It's not regular at all. And that's what produces this, sound. Okay, so reviewing, torso, we have just a relaxed state, or we have the anchored state. Then we have the whole larynx, which can be low, can be mid, or it can be high. And the way to check where your larynx is actually if you put your hand on your throat, you can feel your Adam's apple. I'm going to do a siren on thin folds, and I'm going to feel how my Adam's apple starts out down low and comes up. Okay, so. And the other thing you can do to feel your larynx move is you can swallow. So when you swallow, you will feel your Adam's apple go up and back down. Okay, so reviewing, we have the larynx, which we can feel moving by touching our Adam's apple when we swallow and when we siren. And then within the larynx, we have the first cartilage, the cricoid cartilage, and then the thyroid cartilage, which is much bigger. And both of those, in my normal speech, are vertical. Okay, and I can tilt them. Remember, we can tilt the thyroid to give that sweeter sound when we sob. And we can tilt the cricoid when we're going to belt or yell. Hey! So larynx, we have cricoid, thyroid, and then inside, at the base, we have the true vocal folds, and then above them, we have the false vocal folds. Remember, the false vocal folds are little fatty folds. And the options for those are mid, constrict, and retract. So let me constrict a little bit. You don't want to constrict, you don't want to have a lot of air coming out or pressure when you're constricting, because that will cause pain, scratchiness. So kind of when you grunt, that's the sound that you're making. I sometimes accidentally go into slack. So mid, and then retract. And what happens from mid to retract is that this extra noise that you're hearing in mid goes away when you retract. And if you put your hand here and you do like a yawn, you'll feel your whole neck area kind of expand. And that is what pulls those fatty flaps away and allows them to retract. So if I'm in mid, you'll be able to feel as you do that. And so to practice that, you can practice getting that yawning feeling. Okay, so false vocal folds constrict, mid, and retract. Now, when you're singing a lot, if you're singing for 2 or 3 hours, it's going to help you to retract, because your false vocal folds, basically anytime, if we're doing something that's hard, or we get nervous or whatever, we can, and there's other things vocally that can happen, we can have an issue with constricting, and it may not sound like we're constricting to ourselves. We may not be able to hear it, but we could be doing some of that, and that can produce some scratchiness, some tired, some pain. And so really, if you're going to be singing a lot, it's helpful to learn to retract your false vocal folds. Okay, so reviewing: torso, larynx. Remember, we can move the whole larynx up and down. And then the larynx is made up of the cricoid cartilage, the thyroid cartilage, which can be, either of them can be vertical or tilted. And then inside we have the true vocal folds: thick, thin, stiff, slack. And that's where the sound is produced. And then above that we have the false vocal folds, those fatty tissues. We don't want to constrict usually. Some people do it for effect, some pop musicians. Mid, retract. And then above the false vocal folds, we have the airy epiglottic sphincter. So a sphincter, opens, closes. And the way I'm talking right now is with a wide airy epiglottic sphincter. Now, if you go, nya, 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 boo, boo, that is the narrowing of the airy epiglottic sphincter. So let me do it on just an ah sound. Ah. You can hear how the vocal quality changes a lot. So we have the options for that are wide and narrow. But remember, it's a continuum. So when I'm singing, I could be really wide, or maybe I'll just be a little bit narrowed. And one thing to know about the airy epiglottic sphincter is that when it is narrowed, it thickens and shortens the vocal folds. And so it can make it, if you're singing for long periods, it can help with vocal fatigue. If you have some narrowing, it can help prevent that. Also, when we narrow the airy epiglottic sphincter, something changes in the way the sound is produced, and actually the listeners are able to hear a narrowed airy epiglottic sphincter, AES. It sounds louder to the listener. So not only are you doing less work, the listener is adding some work to it. So if you need to be louder, adding some of this will help add some volume. So again, so the AES can be narrow or wide. Okay, so those are the structures in our larynx. And then the two really big things to think about in terms of how they will affect your vocal quality that are up here are your tongue and your velum or your soft palate. So I already went over soft palate movement, and now let's talk about tongue. So we are talking about the back of our tongue, the dorsum, as well as the root. That's what I want you to focus on, learning to be aware of where it is. So when you say the vowel E, 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 you can feel the back of your tongue. You can feel it between your molars. E, did you feel it? Make that sound, E. You should feel it between your molars. Now, that's what we call high tongue, okay? Now, when we have a low tongue, that would be when we go, ah. So when the doctor wants to look in your throat, he wants your tongue to go low so that he can see it. And he generally will ask you to make the sound ah, and you can feel ah, your tongue drops down and back. The other option is mid. So when your tongue is mid, it's going to be hanging out, the back of your tongue is going to be hanging out between the upper and lower molars. That's mid tongue. We also have an option of compressed tongue, but this is rarely used. It's most often used in opera. And in that case, the tongue is high in the back and then the front of the tongue comes up. So I'm not going to demonstrate that because I don't use it. But anyway, with your tongue, so we're talking about high, mid, low, the back of your tongue, this can affect your larynx. So if my tongue is kept in a low position, it can push the larynx down. So I've had instances where I'm singing and I'm like, I'm singing in my lower range and I want to go up a little higher, not even super high, more in my mid range. And it's like, I just can't get those notes. And like they're flat. And what was happening was that I was holding my tongue down and that was pushing my larynx down. And if your larynx isn't free to move, it's going to make it harder to hit the pitches that you want to hit. So it's good to develop an awareness of where your tongue is when you're singing. I prefer when I'm singing now to use a high tongue because it allows my larynx to move more freely. And also, if your tongue is low, you can have some friction happening, which if you're singing for long periods of time, that can cause issues. So having a high tongue, I'm able to keep a high tongue and produce all the vowels and consonants that I want to produce, and so that is my choice. But for different types of music, having a high tongue isn't appropriate. It wouldn't sound like the vocal quality we wanted. For instance, an operatic vocal quality generally has a low tongue, and that's what gives it the darker sound. So having a high tongue is going to give you a brighter sound, and having a lower tongue is going to give you a darker sound. Okay, so we've got tongue, we've got the velum, or the soft palate, can be high with all the air coming out of the mouth, mid with the air split, and low with all the air coming out of the nose. And then we also have the head and neck anchor. And this is something that helps us achieve some of those harder vocal tasks that we want to do. And it also helps with stamina if we use a head and neck anchor. Okay, so one last review. We have the torso. Then we have the larynx. At the base of the larynx, we have the cricoid cartilage, and then that connects with the thyroid cartilage. And those can be vertical or tilted. Inside of those cartilage, it's really behind the thyroid cartilage, we have the true vocal folds that go from the front to the back, and then we have the false vocal folds, which are those fatty little tissue knobby things sticking out. And then above that, we have the area epiglottic sphincter, which can be wide or it can be narrow. And that's what makes up the larynx. And then affecting vocal quality up higher are our lips and our jaw, which affect it to a lesser extent, so that's why I'm not focusing on them in this video. And then also the tongue, being high, low, mid, or compressed, and the velum, or soft palate. Okay, so, and then also the head and neck being relaxed or anchored. So those are all of the structures. Let me just make sure I didn't miss any. Oh, I don't think I said the lips when I reviewed this last time. I think I did, lips and jaw. So those are all of the structures that can have an effect on our vocal quality, and those are all of the structures that we can actually learn to control independently. So that's an overview of the 13 structures that Estill has identified that musicians can learn to control and that contribute to differences in vocal quality.